Hi folks, this is James O'Hagan. I'm the co-programming chair here at MIT Enterprise Forum, New York City. Thank you for joining us this evening. We've gathered a multidisciplinary group of executives to discuss the trends driving smart buildings and smart homes. Before we get started, I just want to tell you a bit about MIT Enterprise Forum. We're a nonprofit with a focus on supporting the tech and entrepreneurship community, and we have chapters around the world. We regularly organize workshops, expert panels, and fireside chats. You can learn more about our events at mitefmyc.org. Without further ado, let me introduce our moderator for the evening, Corey Glickman, Global Head of Sustainability and Design Consulting Services at Infosys. Corey?
Thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be here. So for today's agenda, we're going to have a very lively discussion around the 3Ds and what it means across the digitization. So for the agenda that will follow today, we just talked a little bit about, this is an enterprise forum component. I will do a brief introduction about the state of the industry. We'll have some panelist intros, and then that will lead into a discussion, which should take place about 40 to 50 minutes of questions that we prepared. During the session, James and I will be monitoring anything that you have in the chat box as you have questions coming across, and we'll be sure to try to work those questions in real time as possible. We'll also left a good 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the conversation to address those directly. And any questions that we may not be able to get to during this live session, we will collect and respond back through further correspondence. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, we talk about the state of the industry. We talk about the 3Ds, which is really the confluence of the megatrends that are driving this rapid transition into the built environment that we've seen across our major cities. This focus around New York City tonight, and our guests will get pretty specific into some of the examples and details. But first, let's all just set the context of what the 3Ds are and how they're reinventing the built environment. First of all, we'll talk about the digital economy, which is the digitization of building operations, consisting of IoT, mobility, and cloud. Second will be around the decentralization of electric grids. And third, the area around decarbonization and what that means in related to consumer trends, the regulatory components, and what it means to climate changes, which really is the E part of sustainability. I have a feeling we'll also get into the S and the G components also today during this conversation. So first, we'll talk about the digital economy. What we're presenting here is a mode of what I would call logical architecture diagram. And this is focusing on the digitization of the building operations with the IoT, the mobility, and the cloud tech. And it's really broken down into how do you orchestrate a full digital stack across various systems. And this is representative. There could be other variants, of course, that you've attended, but I think this is a good summation of what you would see in most baselines. And it really is composed of three areas: what it has to do with decision-making, secondly, what's a digital mesh, and third on the ground is around digital foundation. So with the decision-making, this is where you see the personas involved in the different stakeholders within a system. And this is what we'd call a systems of action. So it would feature areas such as emerging tech, the business KPI-driven components, what does it mean to be multi-channel? And then we're talking about the dashboards and the visualization tools that take place in order to see what's happening in a system. There's the enterprise integrations, and then there's the functional applications. The second layer, which we're calling the digital mesh, which is the system of insights, it's all about business productivity and process and optimization. And main components would be such things as machine learning, certainly AI, predictive analytics and modeling is quite important. What are we doing with energy management and how asset and service management take place? There are other categories, of course, in here, but these are the broad ones. And then the third level is around the digital foundation. And this would be the system of things. So such as how do you regulate temperature? What's going on with refrigeration systems? How are you metering and energy measurements across here? What kind of equipment control panels are being used? And certainly areas around health components as we look at healthy buildings. So this is really around sensors and equipment. The second D that we're talking about is grid modernization. And here I've created a pyramid to express the concept here. So within this pyramid, the way to read this is there's 4 layers that talk about how do we go from a significant upgrade as we start from the bottom and and work our way up. And then along the side, you can see different levels of maturity coming across here. So from the bottom layer, we're talking about a physical layer. This is where we would see the SCADA devices, the AMIs, the communication networks, remote controls, etc. Then there's a data layer around loading the meters. Some systems are looking at weather data. And then of course, GIS data is quite prevalent and important. And then there's the engineering and planning at the next level. So what are the profiles and how do you get to forecasting? And then ultimately to grid operations. So as you build up your capabilities, you usually start, well, you would always start at the physical layer, and then how do we advance that data foundation? How do we get to the engineering and planning, and ultimately that monitoring and control, which can be not just compliance and measurement, but also forecasting and predictive modeling. And then depending on where you are on your journey, you'll be at different points of maturity, as you can see down the right side here. And then the third section here, we talk about decarbonization. And this formula that we have up on top here, thankfully was shared by Jeff Hendler, who will do a brief introduction in a moment, with his company, Logical Buildings. And it's really quite a clever formula here that's both simple but also complex once we get into the details. So how do you relate consumer trends and regulatory regimes around climate change for that environmental sustainability? And it's really key to do it in a quantifiable way, not just a qualitative way of doing this. So the formula that they have shared with us is how do we deal with decentralization? And by adding this to digitalization, we can then look at what is decarbonization and take that sum out of there so that we know ultimately what is the value that we end up with. So with the advanced metering infrastructure, the upgrades from the utilities, we're talking about trillions of smart meter data points that can be used for energy usage data. For the digitization side, the idea of IoT, we know that devices are getting cheaper, they're coming in higher quality, they're becoming much more prevalent and ubiquitous across there. Thus, it's enabling across many kinds of systems where it wasn't before. This combined with cloud has really enabled buildings to do some pretty remarkable things. And we combine the decentralization along with the digitalization, we can now really look at decarbonization and start looking at how the reduction of that decarbonization can be addressed in a quantifiable way. And this, you can then calculate where the value metrics are. And on the bottom here, we talk about an energy value management stack. So such areas as 24/7 energy efficiency, how do we look at coincident peak reduction, what is the monthly peak demand, what is tariff optimization formulas, how demand response and grid carbon intensity are some of the key components when we look at this stack across here. So with this very quick summary, I'd like to take it right into the panel discussion. So we have gathered here today a panel of technologists and thought leaders in this space to discuss, what technologies and strategies they are implementing today and how these smart buildings and related real estate trends are impacting owners, operators, and technology providers. So what I'd like to do now is to do a brief introduction to each of our guests and have them talk a little bit about what their role is and a little bit about their background and company. So I'm going to ask each of our guests to spend 1 to 2 minutes, a little bit about themselves after I introduce them so we can spend the majority of our time actually going into the questions here. So first, let's start with Jeff. Jeff Hendler, who's CEO of Logical Buildings. Welcome. Jeff, I'm going to say the most famous words. You're on mute.
That off. Thank you, Corey, and everybody else participating on the panel. At Logical Buildings, we built a cloud platform. We're a smart building software company, and we've built mobile tools that enable property managers, facilities managers to take advantage of these 3 trends of digitalization, decentralization, and decarbonizing, to lower their energy costs, to be able to track their carbon emission reductions, and also provide these similar tools to the residents as well, as we'll describe. And utilizing data to monitor what new on-site renewable resources, otherwise known as DER, distributed energy resources like battery storage, to make that a valuable resource and asset to these types of buildings.
Thank you, Jeff. Next, I'd like to introduce Richard Regitano Jr., who's VP, Vice President of Engineering at AvalonBay Communities, Inc. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Corey, and good evening to everybody, and thanks for joining. Work in the engineering team for AvalonBay. We were kind of at the cross section of all things that we do at AvalonBay. We are a housing provider. We build and manage and develop residential buildings across the country. We're kind of the engineering team supports many aspects of the business. So the development of new assets, construction teams. Our biggest internal kind of customer is the operations and maintenance organization, where we work very closely, making sure the buildings are operating efficiently and effectively and safely, of course. And so with that, we also work with our sustainability and corporate responsibility groups, where we institute new technology. We test, we innovate, and we find new and innovative ways in order to improve our business. So thank you, Corey.
Well, thank you. Welcome, Richard. And last, I'd like to introduce Garret van der Boom, who's Global Director of Business Development at Samsung Build. Garret?
Hey, everyone. Garret van der Boom. I'm Head of Business Development over at Samsung SmartThings, specifically in the builder industry. So SmartThings itself is Samsung's global platform of all things IoT, mostly in the consumer space. So mostly consumer appliances, televisions, mobile handsets, and all the products we make. So SmartThings is that cloud that brings all those devices together in one interface, but it also brings all those devices together in a back end that can be plugged into other systems like Jeff Hendler's company at Logical Buildings and develop solutions specifically for the builder industry. So how do you take not just the hardware, but the hardware plus the software plus enterprise applications and experiences, speaking to the mesh that Corey mentioned earlier in that stack? How do we bring more holistic solutions from our hardware to our partners? That's both in a kind of holistic Samsung experience, but also bringing Samsung's products into other people's experiences.
Well, thank you all. I know this is going to be a great discussion. So let's dive right into it. So we're going to organize the discussion around the 3Ds itself, and we'll see where it takes us from there. So first off, I'd like to start off with Jeff. I'm going to start you with the first question today. So Jeff, can you describe how the portfolio building owner uses smart thermostats to create transitional energy value?
Sure. Yeah, so what is transactional energy value? Let's just define that, and then we'll see how building owners like AvalonBay are able to take advantage of that in a good way. Transactional energy value is having the capability to dispatch load behind the meter in your building that reduces constraint on the grid, whether it's in the utility or even on the wholesale grid itself, and be paid for that. So it's really transactional. There's actually cash that can be earned, costs that can also be reduced, but the currency that's actually created by dispatching the load at different times when it's most valuable to reduce it is a capability to create the building into an asset. Smart thermostats is a tool that building owners can use. It's easy to facilitate to change set points at those times when the grid is constrained. So with notification to a building from say a demand response provider, a building can enroll in such a program and pre-cool an amenity space like the lobby or the gym or the playroom that is typically you'll find in an amenitized high-rise multifamily building, and then change the set points during the demand response event, and therefore reduce kW at time of use when the grid actually uses it. We even have buildings that actually throttle down their EV chargers from say 7.2 kW to 2.2 kW. They might have 20 chargers. That's 100 kW. That's a lot of value to the grid from one building to provide as a resource. It literally becomes a virtual power plant. I don't want to speak too much on behalf of AvalonBay, but they've done this on a portfolio basis, being able to reduce dispatchable load, different ways of doing that literally are reducing Boston by a megawatt and New York City by over a megawatt amongst the portfolio of their buildings on demand at notice. And that's an incredible feat that requires IoT, requires decentralization of the grid to allow the evaluation of dispatchable load. And clearly at those hours, reducing load, those are the most intense, highest carbon emission hours. So when buildings like AvalonBay do that, they're actually helping the environment by using less carbon during those hours.
That's great. And actually, Richard, the next question will be for you, because I'd like to expand upon the mention of AvalonBay. So maybe you can give a little bit more insight into that. And then I have a secondary question to follow up with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that we've established a great partnership with Logical Buildings to be able to deploy a resource that not only helps AvalonBay but helps all others, because of our ability to displace those types of large amounts of energy creation. And the teams have really rallied around it, because they understand that there's just a common thread amongst these types of initiatives. And really it's just been really a great experience from the people who operate our buildings throughout the organization. And we've been able to do it very successfully with great partners. So
that's great. So Rich, can you explain a little bit more about how you're deploying the digitization of the building operations with IoT in this instance?
Yeah, so the IoT is really the future. It's amazing. Over the last I would say 5 or 6 years, the enormous cost reduction in availability of very friendly tools and sensors that we can leverage. And surely, as Jeff explained, one of those examples is being able to, with very short notice, in some instances, extremely short notice, we're able to really be able to dynamically turn the way that our building operates for a period of time to benefit the grid. But beyond that, we're able to leverage these sensors in a way that can help the business in multiple ways. As an example, we have sensors on equipment motors, and we're able to understand if the equipment and the motor specifically is operating within a tolerance that we have determined is within those tolerances. And so when equipment starts to fall outside of that, we're able to deploy resources, be notified, and take action. And so that's likely extending the life of a piece of equipment that we may have had to replace sooner. It's it's improving the efficiency of the equipment, so it's using less energy. It's extending the life, and it's likely costing us less money to maintain. So that's another example. Another partnership that we've had with Samsung is we're excited about the future of appliances, and so IoT and appliances is another area where we're really digging in, and I'm sure Garret is going to talk about that. Reliability is another piece that we are really leveraging sensors. And so, something that we're passionate about is making sure that all of our equipment is safe and reliable. And so we dig deep into equipment such as elevators, and being able to improve the reliability of a piece of equipment that is used so heavily. I mean, I was on a call earlier today, and we were talking about the fact that the elevator is the lifeblood of a building, a high-rise building, and most buildings, even if it's not a high-rise per se. And being able to deploy relatively inexpensive, easily available sensors, pipe those directly into data systems, AWS, for example, and be able to do very quick analysis. We're able to leverage those very, very available IoT devices to really improve our business and deliver a better product for the customer.
That's great. Garret, I'd like to pick up on the role of Samsung. It was mentioned a couple of times, and of course, you're famous for appliances and for various aspects. So can you talk about a little bit more about what that program is about, and also how the dynamic energy load control works between those devices, such as smart thermostats, the BMS and HVAC systems, and smart appliances themselves?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Samsung Smart Things, we have kind of holistic solutions that can go into some smaller properties. You have, as we mentioned here, we talked about these BMS systems and HVAC systems and these large high-rise towers that AvalonBay builds. You look at those buildings, I mean, for a long time, those buildings have been allowed to pay money back to the grid, or they can have a relationship with their utilities because they just, that's a lot of load. You heard that AvalonBay can shift a megawatt across their buildings. One of the really exciting things that was happening though is it's not now just on these high-rise towers and common area energy use. Is starting to permeate into the residence uses. And that's happening because of, meter data. So meters to put into a building that can get more granular information about the activities going on, the cost of sending that to a cloud, the openness of that data from the utilities is really providing great information that can show, that we can start to get to beyond just the big, huge shifts in the common areas that the building owns into benefits to the residents. So something that as these networks go into these buildings, for other purposes, say your large building management system, you now have the network in the building and you can extend that to thermostats, you can extend that to appliances. These IoT capabilities are allowing them to be part of that dispatchable load. So as an example, in the past, as I mentioned, a building would really look at what's on their energy bill, regulation shifting to where a building residents can get paid for smaller kilowatt changeovers. And that's where it really makes sense to go beyond just the huge energy use. It go into, in an individual apartment, it used to be difficult to tell an appliance to shift load at a certain time and invest in that. Now that technology is already in there, that infrastructure is already in there. And you can go from just the HVAC system to lighting and appliances, tell people, hey, you have the resident experience in their hands. You can let them know that maybe right now it is not, if you go an hour later, you can set your cooking for an hour later, or maybe you do your laundry an hour later. A lot of the energy use in our appliances can be shifted just by habits, whether you can, it could be told to use cold water rather than hot water. This stuff is changing quite a bit from just being a whole building operation in high-rise towers down to less expensive solutions to get in the building in the first place. You present a lot more features with that same infrastructure, and now we're able to do it at further down the threshold on devices that may not have huge load independently, but as an aggregate can make a huge shift.
It's fascinating what you're doing with predictive and prescriptive data analytics. As you talk through this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
Oh, no. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. In connection with this, Jeff, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about IoT components and how do you see those are being used for both health and well-being, whether it's leak detection or indoor air quality. What are the trends that you're seeing in that case?
Yeah, certainly this past year with the pandemic, there's been a huge uptick in demand for both indoor air quality and leak detection, especially like in a high-rise multifamily leak detection. For one, the work from home construct, or hey, imagine a multifamily building with 400 units. There's a lot of water usage, so you're certainly going to want to be able to not just monitor leak detection, but also monitor water consumption. So there are new, next generation available wireless IoT devices that provide that type of capability. And whether it's down to the actual toilet flapper, you can know if there's a faulty flapper, it gets that granular, to just having on the main water valve of coming into a building, monitoring the gallons that are coming in per second. So there's different ways to look at data of water utilization and leak detection that's available, that one can connect to a mobile platform. We have the capability, others do as well, but there's certainly in higher demand because of the work from home dynamic. Indoor air quality across the board, whether we're in commercial buildings or multifamily mixed use, there's been a high demand for indoor air quality. Something that's really fascinating we found though, and we by having a diverse set of data in a building, monitoring HVAC and indoor quality independently, we were able to figure out when there was a faulty air filter in a certain zone of a building, which is really fascinating. Indoor air quality sensors typically monitor particles per million of dust. And when HVAC is working properly, it's not that much. There's less dust in the air. When HVAC equipment isn't working properly, there's an uptick in HVAC. In dust per particle per million. So seeing that correlation of data that we see in the background set off alerts and anomalies that we're able to point out to a building that, hey, check your filter. We think there's a faulty filter because your particles per million should be going down, not up when your HVAC system's on. And sure enough, that's what it was. So we were like really blown away by that. And that's become like a big advantage for return to office. Now RTO is coming to replace WFH, so to speak, of working from home. People want to feel secure and healthy in their environment, and we use technology to be the so to speak, the eyes and ears and see forward of what's happening before things just actually break down. And that's what IoT literally does for everybody. It provides that real-time fault detection that's very valuable.
I want to actually expand a little bit because one of the fascinating things that I've seen with your product is that you've used some gamification, right, in some of the mobility components to get user buy-in, because without users, the systems, will they take place? So can you talk a little bit about what that's about?
Sure, and AvalonBay is a great example. We have property teams of portfolio buildings in Boston, New York, to get that like Yankees, Red Sox type of, going at each other there. And so we have our folks on our app play Kilowatt Crush. We noticed like early on, folks playing Candy Crush that monitor buildings. Like, hey, we got to gamify this and align interests of operations folks who are running the building day to day with the goals of corporate. And Kilowatt Crush was the answer. So when folks take action based on alerts and they modify how the building's operating, they get points for every type of action that they take. And we do provide training. Like we're doing spring training right now in Boston and New York with the Avalon folks and others, and getting ready for the summertime, and actually empirically proving that, hey, if you change certain set points or utilize an on-site resource in a different way, you really do reduce your KW. You get points for that as well. Not running a trash compactor for a high-rise building between 3 and 6, easy way to save 15 to 20 KW. Like that's like a easy layup type of thing to do. Or shifting or move outs in the afternoon to the morning. You get points for that. And that translates into Amazon cards and certificates of like the MVP of the building or the DR superstar, the demand response superstar. And that goes a long way of getting the folks who run the building really involved. And it also provides accountability as well, that people stand up and take responsibility with the technology.
Okay, so where we're going to go next here is I'd like to expand a little bit more, Rich, with as we look at the electrification of this grid, as we're talking about AvalonBay in particular. What are the challenges with the heat and the water components, and who will be responsible for upgrading this grid? As we look at this future here.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, it's a difficult question. I think something that this is definitely the topic, and we've sit and participate in different groups in different markets, and we have the fortunate ability to be in multiple markets across the country. New York is definitely one of the fastest accelerating groups, which is exciting, and we get to see other markets as well and how they're pacing with New York, but. I think when we think about the electrification of our buildings, certain markets are there, and heating and cooling with heat pumps is there, and it's a tried and tested technology. And I think where it becomes very difficult is these colder climates, and that's where the challenges are going to be, where you have infrastructure that is still relying on steam in some markets, and distributed steam, or of course natural gas, and propane, and many other obvious sources of fuel. But when you start to shift those heating plants. And I think one of the most difficult that's going to be one of the bigger challenges is going to be domestic hot water. When you get into these colder climates, the temperature of the water coming into these buildings is cold in these in the winter months and the shoulder months. And those are the biggest challenges. And that's where the biggest loads and that's where the biggest innovation is needed. We need innovation in the way that the grid is built, the reliability of the grid. We're going to need innovation in the equipment that we're heating the water or the space heating. And, I think there's technologies out there now that have made tremendous strides in the most recent years. We've seen, in probably a dozen or so years, heat pump availability we've got heat pumps that you can get that you can extract heat from -8 degrees, which is phenomenal. And it's only going to get better. But the backbone of all of this is that grid and making sure that that's going to be a reliable source. Over the years, I think the gas infrastructure has proved to be, an extremely reliable source of energy transportation. So that the electric grid needs to follow suit with that in order to be able to continue that transformation into the electric, the future. So.
Oh, that's great. Very, very comprehensive answer. So I guess let's move on to the areas around the decentralization of the electric grid, a little bit more on here. So I'm sorry. Yeah. So let's talk, Jeff, I'd like to take this next question to you. Can you talk a little bit about the advanced metering infrastructure at AMI and the integrated system of the smart meters, the communication networks, and the data management systems?
Sure, and I have as a prop the virtual picture behind me are actual real AMI meters of a residential meter bank, and that's like the untold story going on in every utility district literally across the globe, is swapping out analog meters for smart meters, automated infrastructure metering systems that provide two-way communication, that they provide real-time capabilities. Most importantly, they provide very, very granular data of interval utilization. So imagine getting an EKG on your building, on your meter, whether it's on a big, the house load of the building, the common areas, and now what's behind me are residential meters are getting that same EKG of interval data for their apartment, whether it's a studio apartment or it's a 3-bedroom or a single family house, or on a street level, it could be a Starbucks or a laundromat or a bank. All this information now, for the very first time, believe it or not, is becoming transparent. And that information then that becomes transparent in real time, you can react to. And you can react to it in different ways, manually, by changing different set points in your building or your house, or there's IoT, and IoT, provides that capability to, change the dispatch of what's happening in your home, whether it's the coffee maker, it's a dishwasher, it's dispatchable appliances that Samsung's going to bring to the market behind, and the meter is able to calibrate and measure and verify those types of reductions that are occurring. And also the analytics provides the math for the algorithms of the AI that we're slowly rolling out as we learn from these different types of situations that we're discovering in a building or in a home or an apartment, in terms of that data and how it's interacting with the market. The other important piece that we've been out front with, we just rolled out a consumer-facing app that you could download from App Store or Google Play called Grid Rewards, is that it takes that AMI data and it correlates it to the grid intensity of carbon. That on the grid at that time, in real time, it's looking at the carbon fuel mix and then correlating it to your personal utilization of electricity. So you can know, is this a good time to use electricity from a carbon point of view? There's certain hours of the day that if you use less electricity for 1 hour, the amount of carbon you reduce can be equal to 10 hours. But most people don't know when that happens. They don't have the information. So the AMI data is enabling that to happen by linking it with other very valuable data to provide a glimpse and a full view, I should say, of what can be and what can be achieved.
So, Garrett, I'd like to ask you a question around just based off of what Jeff was just talking about with the meters and the changes of the frequency now. You know, a lot of appliances and components, you know, are designed to work at some kind of peak performance, and they're engineered in a certain way. How does this optimization through meters and through the grid actually, does it have any impact on your designs, or, you know, how do the actual units and devices that comprise of this system, do they need to adapt? Are there special interfaces, standards?
Yeah, I think to answer your question, I think a lot of it comes in two areas. There's sort of, I don't know that it necessarily, what's interesting about appliances, TVs, HVAC systems, the investment in, if you're investing in getting a chipset, Wi-Fi into this product, you get a lot of adjacent possibilities. A lot of times you're investing into, even in a building, you're investing into a certain feature that at the beginning used to be focused on delight, like making our appliances, you needed a Wi-Fi chip in your appliances to showcase certain resident experiences. But having that same technology, it's not design-wise, it's only in the software side. But if we can get the infrastructure in there that's a smart appliance, it's connected to a building system or a system like Jeff's or our app that's resident facing, we can actually give delight and rate, you can increase your rents and give the residents a better experience by having nice interfaces in one side, but using that same data, we can pass that to a management system that can tell it when to turn on and when to change habits. So to answer your question, it's not too much around the efficiency of the product and how it operates. It's really making sure that when we put the investment into hardware that is smart, that we're not just looking at how it lowers energy, but we're looking at how it lowers energy, how it lowers operation costs, and with diagnostics, how it presents new features to the resident. And then our system's built in a way that we do have our resident-facing app for the standard user that goes to retail and buys any Samsung product. We also have our platform built in a way that we hand the same software development kit over to a partner like Jeff. And if he needs to showcase the experience of the same tools that we're using to his users, he can do so. So he can control those devices appropriately based on energy or carbon use. He could get notifications based on any kind of maintenance issue. So we built our stuff to tackle all the stakeholders in one platform in the way we build our offering.
It's very, very cool. And I kind of like to wrap up this part with a question for you, Rich. So as we talk about these on-site renewable resources, such as battery storage, solar, fuel cell, what goes into the decision processes as you think about the AvalonBay properties and other properties?
So this is an easy one. I mean, I think, one of the exciting things about AvalonBay is we are very committed to, all of these emerging technologies, and maybe they're not necessarily emerging at this point, but they're definitely hitting the markets. When we look at projects, we're looking at things on different analysis. We're looking at payback. We're looking at initial rate of return, but it's obviously, and I can give you some of the figures that we look at and where and when we make decisions. But like I said, I think the most important thing is that we're committed, and I've got some exciting numbers to share about all of the all of these technologies and things that we can do to really improve the environment, that we can improve the reliability of the grid, that we can decentralize things. But we're looking probably in a 6.5% payback on those types of technologies. But really, if we're focused on that IRR and somewhere in the 13 to 20% range, that's what we're looking for. But when you think about solar and you think about battery storage, we are actively trying to, we're developing a building right now with battery storage that's actually does not have a component of solar. And really it's, again, looking at new and innovative ways to provide capacity to the grid. And I know we've partnered with Logical Buildings on that project, but I'm happy to kind of throw some numbers out there. We've got 20 communities that have solar up and running right now. We've got 36 planned, and those are producing 95% of the production that we expected. So it's a tremendous accomplishment by a lot of teams. And, we have many consultants and specialists that are working and helping us get there. And it's extremely exciting. And so when we get through, we have phase 1 of our solar up and running. We are in the middle of installing phase 2. We're planning phase 3, and phase 4 is being engineered. When we get through phase 4, we'll have almost 9 megawatts of solar capacity, and there'll be more in the future. So it's really exciting. We're 100% committed to it. We of course look at things and we run a business, but AvalonBay is committed to all of these strategies and however we can implement them.
Giving the numbers are great, and I'm actually going to throw this back to Jeff now. So, how much pressure does it put on your services to scale? As you see these potential numbers and the size of the properties.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so part of it is it's having great partners. Where we also are really out front and successful in is being able to integrate with very large partners, like integrating with Samsung as an example. So when you have a strong partner that is global and has like a whole menu of items to integrate with, like the Smart Things Cloud is all encompassing of so many different types of gadgets that are, whether it's appliances, as Garret mentioned, or it's on it's flat screens. When you go into a multifamily building common, there's a lot of flat screens, as those become, there's a lot of phantom power, with smart plugs, we have something in a workout room. There's a lot of application that is available in IoT to deploy to, monitor, manage, reduce load, reduce carbon. Having a strong partner gets you there and is able to help you scale. And having also, partners like AvalonBay who push the envelope of, wanting to be, first in class, also helps us. So, we did the first battery installation in the Northeast, I think in the East Coast, for a high-rise multifamily building that we just completed with AvalonBay. And it's a real, poster child for the state of New York, for that type of application. And we're going into our first summer that not only will this battery be used to peak shave on a daily basis, but we're altering its AI that was created in California for a California market. We joke around, their AI is called Athena. We taught Athena how to talk with a Brooklyn accent. So, the New York market is much different than California. So it's able to dispatch, into the New York ISO's demand response program. It's able to dispatch into Con Ed as 2 different types of programs. It's able to dispatch during these capacity tag events that happen that's unique to New York. So be able to utilize that asset, not just as an on-peak, off-peak, peak shading machine, but to have intelligence of when to charge and discharge at these appropriate times that creates value for AvalonBay. It also creates value decarbonization as well. This is really, really fantastic. And again, it takes having a really big committed partner, as a user, and also big committed partners as technology providers that we like to integrate with.
And actually, I'm going to take this question now back to you, Garret, because as Samsung invests in creating what I'd say another system, right, on top of other systems in the building to support this, can you talk a little bit about what it's taken to not only develop such a system, but how to integrate that to enable what we were just talking about?
Yeah, I think so. We've built our systems primarily. We had the benefit of having already built, as Smart Things is the IoT center of Samsung. We built our tools because we're so global and there's so many different subsidiaries. We built our tools to be able to hand a set of development kit to the various divisions around the world of Samsung. So by default, to make our lives possible and do what we do, we have to hand those tools over to internal teams. So when we come up with a product, we think about we think about it from a development kit handoff perspective, and we do that thinking of who are the potential internal customers, but also who are the potential external customers. There's always going to be scale issues. There's always every platform that you would talk to says that they're open. I would say openness is a goal, and it's always something. It's kind of like democracy. You're always trying to get towards it. It's not always accurate. You always have to make decisions on resourcing. But I will say Samsung is extremely open. Our platform has Google, Amazon, is on Apple phones. Some of the people that would be considered competitors, we work completely with. Our system is now built to the point where we will extend the features of appliances, of our TVs, of our partner devices into any resident experience or back-end enterprise experience that makes sense for the solution. I have not come across a partnership that makes sense for both companies and the end customer, like an AvalonBay, that we haven't been able to build integrations with. And I really pride SmartThings with that. Samsung invested in SmartThings to do that, and they've stayed true to that. So I think to talk about integration and how we build that, I think that's one of the core benefits to Samsung and SmartThings. And I think Jeff's experienced that. I think Rich and AvalonBay, they'll test several solutions. They have to have the ability to test these solutions. That might be one building they acquire might have this resident interface and this BMS system and these other tools. If you try to tell a big customer that they can only plan to use this one system forever, you're not going to be very successful with it. So this has been a really cool experience, and we're right at that spot where we can kind of shift into an integration for a building's needs in a very short sprint. So that's kind of how we built our system from the get-go.
That's cool. I'm going to take a little deviation off of here because there's been a couple of questions that have come up through the Q&A, which I think would fit well into this part of this discussion here. Once again, we will talk about additional questions with the chat session afterwards, but these I think are timely right now. So one of the questions that's come up here is, do public utilities have compatible and sufficiently advanced technologies to make the best use of these technologies discussed by each of you panelists? Are the technologies that the panelists are they vulnerable to cyber attack, particularly with an IoT deployment? So this is a big issue, right now, what's happening in the news at this point. So I think this is something perhaps Richard, you can take this question.
Sure. Well, I think I think I'll rely on Jeff to help here too, but, jump in here. When I think about the compatibility of the public utilities, being able to make the best use of it, I think that we're adapting based on them. And they have an infrastructure that's existing that will likely evolve over time. But I think we're kind of we have the utilities that we have, and that dictates a lot of the ways we implement. Are there initiatives or is there opportunities? Yeah, I mean, I think there's, especially as Jeff can talk about with some of the meter technology and being able to, have the bifurcation of that. There's an opportunity in that, and as the utilities evolve, I think we'll see more and more opportunities. But it's definitely a changing market. I think from a cyber attack perspective, I think that's 100% in all of our minds, all the time, and something that we take extremely seriously and protect, with all of the latest technology, procedures, and team members that are focused on making sure that anything we do, anything that's connected to the internet, is protected at all of the available ways, and it's something that AvalonBay takes extremely seriously.
Jeff, would you like to expand a little bit on this?
Sure. I mean, I think for the utilities, they're great at regulating, setting standards and things like that, and what's key is that they don't get in the way of innovation. And I think they've learned that over many years, decades. And what we see now, which is great, like for example, AMI metering and adopting standards that open up the ability for third-party developers to build mobile applications to take advantage of this data and make it useful to end users. Because when your utility have millions of customers, it's really difficult to figure out what to do and how to do it. Utilities like lowering thresholds. I'll give an example. In New York, in Con Ed, a really big event happened that's unique to the demand response market nationally, and that is they lowered the threshold of demand response participation to 10 watts. I call it the watt heard around the world, because what that did was it democratized demand response. There's 4 million meters on the Con Ed system. Last year, only 2,700 meters participated in demand response, right? I mean, it's like unbelievable. What's the story? So the top 0.001% of buildings, of meters, the largest buildings in Manhattan and 5 boroughs, were able to participate in demand response and earn money. Now, is that fair? So by reducing the threshold to 10 watts, I mean, that's a light bulb behind you, Corey. You turn that off, lighting your room, you could participate and you become a virtual power plant, literally, and actually can earn money for doing that, helping the grid, helping the environment. So that utility making that decision to open up enrollment, participation, the rules of the road, but at the same time providing oversight for reliability is a great recipe for success. And we're seeing that in other utility districts as well. We've seen that globally in other countries as well, that that forecasts great opportunity for buildings to optimize their dispatch and really help decarbonize the environment.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question here, and this one actually is also coming in from a participant. So I think, Richard, this one's going to be fielding with you again. So is quickly changing the operational equipment in very short notice, is it a benefit to the electric grid? Is it always easy? Is it hard? Also, does it increase the wear and tear on the equipment? For example, metal fatigue from rapid temperature changes?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And it's, I think the frequency at which we do this is, while sometimes short notice, it's not necessarily something that takes place on a regular basis. And so, again, Jeff can jump in because he handles a lot, has helped us, deploy a lot of these technologies that support these operations that we take and these procedures that we implement at our buildings. But anytime you're cycling a piece of equipment, of course there's wear and tear on it. We recognize that, we keep that in, that's taken into consideration in the number of times that we do that. And Jeff can tell you that sometimes there's recommendations for things to be cycled on and off, and because of either the time of day, the expected use, the maintenance that may be being done on it, we will and will not sometimes take some of those recommended procedures because we want to potentially avoid some sort of damage, or we have something going on in the building. And so it's a procedure that is developed based on the building and the available systems that you can take advantage of. And given the times, those things change. And so they're very flexible.
Thank you. So let's move on to this, the third D, and this is going to be around the decarbonization, sustainability policies, and ESG corporate objectives. So Garret, I want to start, with not an easy question, but it's a good baseline for us. So, in your opinion, what are the key success strategies for combating climate change? And what are some of the blockers?
Yeah, I think, I can't speak, when you think about decarbonization or climate change as a whole, it's hard for me to comment. I think a lot of people that are in my generation or in this group of people that we're talking to here, they're all very interested in climate change, and it's hard to follow. I read a lot of information on this space, and I try to do what I can in my own personal life. But at the end of the day, honestly, I can speak to how I address it personally, how our business does and how the industry that we're working on does. On a personal level, I really honestly don't think that the decarbonization comes from telling, every individual home that they're going to have to, recycle everything that they do, shift instantly over to electrified home, put solar panels on their house, and move over to a Tesla. I think that a lot of that is there's a lot of room with large companies like Samsung, like AvalonBay, and innovative companies like what Jeff's doing to make the consumers available to live sustainably. So if you look, I love the story of what Rich just mentioned. In that story, he talked about how excited he was to deploy 30 buildings with battery systems and solar. Each of those buildings on average is probably 300 plus units. That's 300 plus people that got to go check out an apartment, move into an apartment, and move into this apartment. And they're living by virtue of what Jeff's doing and what Rich is doing. They're living in an apartment that makes their footprint quite lower. I don't think it's I think it's upon industry and regulation to create the markets that we can then bring innovative solutions that are better than the alternative. With Samsung in general, I would say it's pretty impressive what Samsung does overall. I looked at joining this team and I thought, I'm not necessarily an energy expert. So I hesitated to say whether or not I could be in this space, but what I did realize with Samsung's scale, you can make little micro changes to something and it can have a massive impact. We look at in the US alone, something like 180 million metric tons of carbon is emitted from just appliance usage, from laundry. So if we're able with AvalonBay and partners like that and with our mass scale, we're able to change people's habits from doing a cool water load because they know more information about how their carbon impact. And we make that super easy for them. It's not something they have to go look for. We just operationalize that immediately. That's the equivalent of 20 million homes and annual energy use and carbon footprint. So we're not all of those appliances, but we're a huge part of that globally. So I've always been I've looked at it from, I don't know the answer. Obviously, it's a huge question, as you mentioned, but I look at it on my personal level. I say it's not necessarily what I can do in my individual home, although I like to make those movements. It's really what I can do in this company to affect change. And that could start at a small level. If you go after something at a small level and you work on it in your industry, I know Infosys does this a lot, Corey, you're able to bring those learnings and those teachings to your partners and your customers. And lastly, but not least, I would say a huge learning that I've had in this specific New York experience is don't fight regulation and don't like support a lagger. Be ahead of everything because someone else is going to do it. And if you don't fight regulation and you work with them and you can create a small market, that small market creates a proof of concept that people see. And when people see stuff in these industries, I know Samsung, I know all the partners we work with, when they see the competition doing something, they move. So if you can give people, seeing is believing, if you can show people that hero project in New York and that it's working, every other utility is going to shift. Every builder is going to shift. Samsung's going to see what Logical did, and 20 different Samsungs are going to be calling Logical to see how they did it and if they can invest. So I think that for me, it's creating a proof of concept has been the biggest thing that I think helps make the shift in decarbonization in my life, at least.
Like I said, not an easy question, but a good answer. So thank you. I'd like to actually now build on this with you, Jeff, a little bit. So we all know many organizations, especially when it comes to things like greenhouse gases and decarbonization and anything to do with ESG, it's a challenge to determine your metrics because they're somewhat subjective of what you choose to do, and then how do you report on this? So my question to you is, how will the data collection for benchmarking be regulated and measured for accurate verification, right? How can we prove this? And are there anything to do with data privacy concerns?
Sure, great question. So, I mean, there are certain programs already in place that most building owners subscribe to. For example, on a federal level, the Department of Energy likes buildings to subscribe to Energy Star Portfolio Manager, where every building is uploading on an annual basis monthly data for the consumption. Okay, that's nice, but what does it do for you? Okay, I have monthly data for the whole year. Now what? Then you have, like in New York City, the Green New Deal actually went down, where they're forcing change. Not just, okay, we want your benchmarking. They do have a local law 84 that went into effect from the Bloomberg administration many years ago. That was somewhat like portfolio manager. Like every year you got to report what your monthly data is. But okay, but now what? Well, now here comes the now what? Local law 33. You're going to get a letter grade based on that portfolio score from Energy Star. And if it's a certain number, you're going to get a letter D. And you got to put that letter D on every public entrance to your building if you're 25,000 square feet or above. Now, you know, if you're like a Gen X or, you know, personally you come into a building, do you want to see a D on your building? I mean, we don't want to go into a D that's on a restaurant, right? When you want to eat your food. So there's a type of shaming ownership into changing their energy management, you know, consumption behavior that's going on in the New York City approach with these letter grades. And if you don't put up the letter, you know, you can be fined $500 a month for not doing that. And it's, you know, it's been a conundrum for many buildings because the way the regulatory formula works is somewhat punitive because it looks at square footage, not cubic footage. So if you have a lofty area in your amenity space, you're going to use a lot more energy to heat and cool it, but you get a worse score for doing that. So whatever, you know, you have these issues in terms of the type of benchmarking. But what that does do, it gets the folks who own buildings to start thinking about, okay, how do I improve my score? Also interesting in New York, they look at the entire block and lot of a building. So if you have a mixed use building and you have equity ownership on the entire block and lot, now your letter grade is being affected by users that you can't control, like your residents who have their own meter, or like your retail street level tenants like Starbucks, right? Or the restaurants or the laundromat use a lot of energy. And they're adding to your score. So now, but what that does do is, well, the building is interconnected. The mechanical, electrical, plumbing of the building is interrelated. And now owners have to think about, what can I do to incentivize my residents and my retail tenants at the street level to use less? So it's creating that conversation amongst all inhabitants, so to speak, of the space that's being shared. And so we can argue it's a good thing. That's going to, you know, work towards optimization and reduction of energy, reduction of carbon. It even gets a little more severe in New York because now they have local law 97, which requires carbon emission reduction starting in 2024. And then whereby in 2024, every single building that's above, again, 25,000 square feet will be fined. Like, you will be fined. There's a, you know, 1 out of 5. By 2030, 4 out of 5 will be fined based on where they're at right now in terms of their consumption profile. So that's, you know, they're giving a few years before 2024 for the 1 out of 5 to figure out, are you one of those 1 out of 5? And then, you know, the rest of the buildings, good chance you're one of the 4 out of 5. You need to take action over the next, you know, 8 years, 9 years to reduce your consumption and load. So that's where technology is going to come in. There'll be retrofits going into buildings. There'll be on-site type of renewable generation where you can do it. And there's going to be other incentives for load control for residents and retail tenants that was never there. There used to be what they call a split incentive, that the landlord didn't really have an incentive for a direct metered you know, resident or tenant to do anything for that, but now they do. So those are, you know, regulatory type of initiatives that are forcing change, like it or not, because of more of a stick than a carrot type of approach that we see in New York. Is a question of what other cities are going to adopt that type of metric and that type of philosophy.
And just kind of, you know, connected to this, is there a big difference between how cities might behave, right? So as we talk about these smart technologies, and this is a question that came in from the audience, you know, we're focusing on New York, obviously, tonight, but do we see a similar model for if you're in Minnesota or in LA, or are there going to be variations?
Well, you know, I could comment on that as well. Yeah, there's definitely, it's state by state, there's federal talk, it's carbon tax, all different types of mandates out there that are being kicked around. For sure, mandatory benchmarking has taken off across all the major metropolitan cities in any state. So that is good. I mean, they say, you can't manage what you can't measure. So definitely being able to measure what you're consuming is the first step to know what you have to reduce. But it's really, we see it more as cultural change trends of the demographics of the East Coast and the West Coast and Mid-America of what people think about these things and how much they want it to be their own choice versus mandated types of obligations.
So, Rich, I'm going to throw you a couple simple words, but it's a complex question. Data privacy. So everything that we've talked about and with collecting this data and how do we use this? Give me your thoughts around data privacy and what is the responsibility of like AvalonBay, versus, what Jeff's company does versus Samsung versus, the individual. So how does that work out?
That's a tough one. But before we go to that, there was a little bit more to that question about the climate and the location.
Sure.
I just wanted to expand upon that a little bit. It absolutely does impact what you can do today because the available technologies. If you're in, as an example, we have communities up and down the East Coast. We are able to do, as a simple example of electrification of a building, at the resident level and the main system level, where we're able to do a lot of that in certain markets that have less extreme temperature changes, and that can be even as close as the Mid-Atlantic, for example, where a lot of our buildings the residents have all electric systems. There's no fossil fuel heating for water, for space heating, anything. And so it absolutely does. I think it's because of the extremes. I mentioned earlier the temperature of the water. That's one of the main factors about taking cold water from the inlet to the building to a domestic hot temperature. So depending on where you're physically located and the exterior climate, it's going to impact that. There are tons of opportunities for that, and the technology gets better every day. We're looking at, there's been enormous enhancements in geothermal. There's the heat pump technology is advancing drastically. And so, solar, different solar technologies that we're going to be able to take advantage of in the future. So I think today, if does it impact it? Yes, because there's the climate, the exterior temperature and climate that you're dealing with has a drastic impact the way you design a building, the way you select equipment, the way that you can buy. You physically have to buy the equipment that's available today or going to be available in a year when you're going to put it in. But obviously that will help push the innovation of the technology in the future, so that you can do that more in more harsher climates and in more rapidly changing climates.
Corey, I could take a stab at the question you had around private data privacy.
I'm going to not let Rich off the hook too. So we'll actually we'll give Rich a breather so he can get his thoughts together. Go ahead, Garrett. You can start.
I just want to cover this one because I think we had to tackle this. We have an offering with Smart Things that's been around for about a decade now almost, and that was really sold at retail. And so our permissioning system was really built around someone who is the technology-driven person in the household that buys the system for their house, and they kind of have some permissions around maybe a guest. But we spent the last 2.5 years really building towards an enterprise system. And you've been a part of this too, Corey, and projects we've done with Microsoft and Infosys and things of that nature. We really built it to where the only data that, everything can be opt-in, opt-out either in our SDK that we hand over to a different app that's going to expose that over to a resident. So if it, and so residents can say, I don't want certain data to be sent to this thing or stored. the other side of it is we're able to, the stuff that we do collect is all around making sure the equipment just stays viable, things that the customer, the resident would care about. So is there going to be a catastrophic failure? That's the only data that we're really collecting, no matter what. Even that, we're open to, it hasn't been on record, hasn't happened, but we do make that apparent to the residents and everything of that nature. So that is a really important one. I think that the one thing that helps us in a lot of ways is business model. As a consumer product company, as a company that originally just shipped a ton of boxes and then got into this IoT space and is expanding now significantly globally, our model was just using data to make the product better. We do not have any incentive to, and if you look at what Jeff and Avalon are doing, their incentives are to make the resident experience better. The data is not being collected to sell off your marketing information. It's not being collected to make you listen to more songs and these kinds of things. So our model, we've had to take this very seriously, and that's our stance on this. So it's massive. I think there's been a lot of hiccups of companies that got in. I don't even think it was at the behest of the company itself. Like, there are some companies that I won't name names, but their products got into environments where their permission system and data policies were not built for those environments. And little startups that didn't really know what they're getting into put a lot of that equipment into the space. And it was kind of hard to control. And now all the major players have made a big shift in making sure that these permission platforms are built in a way that are scalable and allow the user to opt in and opt out of the data usage.
I think that's a great answer. And Rich, so I'm going to alter it a little bit for you because I think that was well stated. So the question I would have is, the data is still important to have access, because without this, how will you be able to optimize, the grid and provide the value statements that, you've been talking about? So obviously information has to be made somewhat available, right, in order to deliver on the promise across here. So that's a fine line, but do you have thoughts or ideas of, what best practices are?
I mean, without question, I mean, that's something that AvalonBay takes unbelievably serious. And, we have groups of people that are dedicated to making sure that, we're making what we're doing, the decisions we're making is keeping all information, in the safest, most appropriate way, and dealing with it how it should be. I think a lot of the data that we're dealing with right now is really base building data, and we're very, very much trying to make sure that we're, anything that we're taking actions based on, it's really not resident. It's not our customers' data, and all the things that Garret brought up are at play here. It's just we take it 100%. We're dedicated. We have folks making sure that we're making good, taking every, exploring everything that we need to, checking every box, making sure that we are doing everything that we need to do, should do, have to do, want to do. It's just a core responsibility of us. But I think it's in our DNA to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
That's great. So we have about 15 minutes left in our session, so we're going to now field some of the questions that have come in through the chat session across here. So I'll call out the question, and then let's talk about who's the best person to field this one. So first off, let's go ahead and we've got this one question says, do you host tech IoT devices on the customer's network, or do you create your own network? How do you bring the data to the cloud? I think probably Jeff, this would make most sense for you to take this one.
Yeah, it's a great question. And definitely, it really depends on the customer. Like for certain clients, they want us to use their network. We set up a separate network within their network. So there's a separate SSID, if you know what an SSID is, in the bandwidth that is invisible. So it's not something that it's made public to anyone in the building with, say, a public Wi-Fi system. And for example, that's a way to utilize, the utility of what's on that invisible network. Then there's, just closed systems. So for example, for some, IoT devices that we have, we use a different protocol called LoRaWAN. I mean, that is just a gateway to an end device. Nobody speaks LoRaWAN. Anyone out there speak LoRaWAN? So, it's like, it's a proprietary like bandwidth that's not gonna, and what are you gonna get? Kilobytes of like temperature, whoop-de-doo, right? That's what it is. That's not controlling any device. So, there's a mix and balance of different types of protocols, different types of bandwidths. If you're using, I say, a Wi-Fi network, is ensuring that it's invisible, and it's having that type of dexterity of maximizing value, but at the same time maximizing privacy.
Yeah, I'd add to Jeff's comment there too. It's really important, like in this IoT environment, one of the first questions we sort of ask is how is the internet set up? Wi-Fi set up in the building. A lot of these features, especially on the resident-facing benefits or in the apartment units themselves, they do rely on a Wi-Fi that will be on even when the residents moved out. So a really big trend that's happening is what's called bulk Wi-Fi. It used to be that a building would sell off its Wi-Fi contract to a internet service provider. Maybe it's Time Warner. Time Warner goes in there and they have the relationship, but when you move out of the unit, your Wi-Fi shuts off. Now what's happening is they're putting in the infrastructure. They're doing what Jeff said. They have individual SSIDs that can follow you very securely throughout the property. So you can go down to the pool, you can go off and be in your own secure bubble, and all your devices are secure there. But it allows for Wi-Fi to be another SSID to be open to all the devices so they can be talked to, so that they can, you can turn up and down the thermostat to react to the utilities information at the same time. The coolest benefit about this, in my view, is that the infrastructure used to be, let's put up some RF or some different radio frequency for your thermostats. Let's do another one for your BMS system. Let's put in something for access management. Let's do all these things. The bulk Wi-Fi movement with IoT built in and very securely developed with the standards that are set across industry leading companies, that's really going to shift the ability to do so much more. That infrastructure gets put in and it's already paid for by one of those features, and you can just build upon that with all these other things.
That's great. Let's take the next question here. So this one actually will go, I think, across for all of you, but we've got 3 more questions we want to try to get through here. So, sorry, let me just pull up the proper one here. Okay, so one of the questions that we have is, it sounds like there will be a huge difference between smart buildings and traditional buildings. Will smaller landlords be able to catch up? What will this gap mean? I think, Richard, this one would actually make sense for you to take on.
Well, I think, there's absolutely opportunities at all levels of the buildings, and our buildings tend to be larger buildings. So actually probably Jeff or Garrett might be able to answer this better, but some of the initiatives that we have implemented are 100% scalable at almost any size, and really don't require necessarily a large building, but our experience is there. So I'll let them jump in.
Yeah, I could comment there. I think the bigger thing that happens is not the tech. I think that there's technologies. We mentioned the bulk Wi-Fi offering and how that can open up a lot of it. Once that Wi-Fi system's put in, and if it's with an open partner, they can give access to those thermostats for Jeff to connect them to a utility grid. So you're getting a giant chunk of the energy that a unit uses. You're also giving resident experiences. There's some startups that are quite well funded that are going out in a SPAC this summer. There's, that just announced it. raising. Both of them have $500 million in cash and multi-billion-dollar valuations, and those guys are 100% geared at all sizes of apartments. So what Rich's large buildings allow for is the economies of scale of like a large boiler room, and it makes it really efficient on that and that footprint in the city. But there are solutions that work for smaller companies. I think the biggest thing that the smaller companies lack is they don't necessarily have a person that you can call and talk to tell them about where what they could be doing and where they could be doing these features, and how to reach them and how to educate them on the budgets, because it's really in talking to Rich and working with him for a while, it's amazing how many times a decision of one area like appliances can affect your decision on the platform you choose and these other things. So the biggest fallback on those small companies is not that the technologies aren't there, it's that the companies don't have an innovation team. They don't have a person to talk to. They rely on maybe a consultant that's trying to sell an old technology to them. But there are a lot of startups that are working to do that, and they're going after kind of the biggest buckets of energy or the biggest buckets of revenue increase and things of that nature.
Okay, next question. So this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just one comment there. So I think, that's the good news about AMI smart meters that are being rolled out everywhere, because that's a game changer for any size space that's being utilized. So whether it's, it's a studio apartment, or whether it's Gillette Stadium, we're in Gillette Stadium. Hey, that's cool, right? Big. But we're also in a studio apartment and we're using the same technology, exactly the same technology. So, it comes down to what do they both have in common? They have a smart meter. And now I could track all the dispatchable load behind that meter. And that really does democratize demand management, demand response, and anyone can then, literally, if you have Alexa, you have Google Home, you have Bixby from SmartThings, you have like these smart ecosystems that speak to smart devices. It makes it even easier to now dispatch your loads. I'm sure with Samsung, with SmartThings, when smart appliances are coming in, they're dispatchable. You'll be able to create your own, demand management scene, so to speak, through Bixby, and say, hey, when there's a grid event, do X, Y, and Z, and just tell it to do that, and it will. It'll change the set point on the thermostat. It's gonna take the smart plug and turn the lights off. It's gonna speak to your Hue bulbs. It's gonna do all when you go to turn on the dishwasher, it's not gonna turn on, because it's a grid rewards event. It's a grid, it's a demand management event. So there'll be all these automated, intuitive type of capabilities that's really there right now. And those dots are being connected, and it doesn't really matter what size or space you are. So it's the meter's democratizing all that.
That's great. I have a question specifically for Rich that's come across the board. So Rich, I want to talk to you about predictive maintenance. Is this driving operational savings in the multifamily sector? And if so, how is it doing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we are committed to, the ability to have these types of sensors, and not only the sensors, but, we've had sensors for many years with BMS systems and such, but being able to really, the interesting thing is being able to take advantage of those notifications, being able to take that real-time information, be able to take actions, and then mix that with historical data, being able to predict maintenance needs, being able to understand the lifespan of an equipment, how is the equipment operating, how are we able to take data that we're collecting about a motor or a piece of equipment, understand that lifeline, and be able to then implement change and strategy and perform maintenance or replace the equipment is absolutely impacting our business and providing us with opportunities.
Okay, so we've got time for one last question, which I think each of you will want to weigh in. Sir, go ahead, please.
So like in early days of IoT, so we use SmartThings leak detection around a cogeneration system in Midtown Manhattan for a cogen machine that AvalonBay has built. It uses cogen machine, and Rich was on site, and he saw like the little leak detection. He's like, what's that? So that's like a new wireless, IoT thing. Logical put that there. He goes, oh really? And he came over and he like dumped water on it to see what would happen. And suddenly we saw the alerts shoot off, and we called up Midtown to the property manager, and we said, hey, what's going on there by the cogen? So it was really funny. He really tested it out.
Yeah,
but that's so important in terms of the buy-in. That it works.
Yeah, and Jeff, sorry to step on your toes there, but the key there was that this is a extremely expensive cogen system with a $35 retail sensor that turned that into, and that's not predictive maintenance, but that's just getting IoT in some areas makes you notify before it becomes a problem, and as you're collecting this information, it becomes more predictive. But even just getting the information before the resident knows about the problem is a massive shift, and you can do that with pretty cheap sensors today.
I would have liked to have been in the room when that incident took place. I'd like to have seen that. This last question is great, actually, because it kind of takes us all to, I think, to stretch a little bit. So, and I think this is for all of you. So have any of you explored vehicle to grid in context of your work? What hurdles do you see in harmonizing electric vehicles, buildings, and the grid into one well-functioning machine? Have any of you even thought about this? Have you been exposed to this?
We're definitely working on it on our side. I think, Jeff, you probably have the most applicable solutions that you work day to day. I know we have whole divisions that work on this, but I would go to you first.
We're actually doing that in Boston in particular. We are starting to do it in New York as well. First of all, there's definitely been an uptick in EV charging demand in garages. So imagine you have a high-rise multifamily building and there's 400 units. You could have 300 spaces, garage space below the deck. And now potential renters they might not have an EV car yet, but they're shopping for one. They're thinking about one for next year. So before they get into that lease, they want to know, hey, can I park my car here if I get one next year? So it's the most revenue from EV charging was clocked in actually in April. So there's been this uptick in EV charge utilization. We see that as a demand response type of resource because a car on an EV charger, many of the chargers are capped out at 7 kW. And if you have 10 chargers and each charger will have like 2 outlets, that's like 20 charging components at 7 kW, that's like 140 kW. Reducing it by 5 kW. I might have mentioned earlier in our discussion, which we're doing, that's 100 kW amongst those 10 chargers that might have 2 outputs. 100 kW is like a building, literally a building peak demand event, and being able to monetize that within demand response and inhibit for those hours. The car will charge, but it'll charge at a lower rate, and we haven't had any pushback from the EV because most EV owners are looking to combat climate change. So this is what they're doing to combat climate change. They're allowing their car to charge at a lower rate of dispatch of getting charged for 2-3 hours. That's their contribution, and it makes a big difference to the grid to keep the lights on. So we're going to see more of that for sure happening in multifamily, and I'm sure we'll see that in homes. There's a lot more companies coming out with solar plus storage for single family homes. Obviously you have Tesla Powerwall, but you have Sun and you have Sunrun. You have a lot of companies out there that have these types of installations, and those homes will also benefit from those types of control at the right time, not to be charging. If you would be charging, it won't let you. So you're able to help the grid benefit, get paid for it as well. You have a payback on your investment. So we see that as in the near term happening as a trend.
Yeah, and I'd just comment there, Jeff. You said it won't let you a couple of times. I just want to call out to people that it will notify you, and you'll have the option to adjust. But definitely, we are experiencing the exact same thing. We're actually have some things coming that will launch next year that we so I can't talk too much about all of this, but to your point, very much aligned that battery that's in that car is definitely demand response or time of use benefit or asset. And when we're talking about these moments, I think that Rich mentioned it earlier. It might be last minute, but a lot of times it can be scheduled ahead of time. You can get notifications well in advance, and it's not all day. It's peak moments where we're trying to make sure that natural gas power plant doesn't necessarily need to put off all that energy. So if we can get through this next hour, we can make this happen. If everyone can turn down their thermostats by 2 degrees, we can shift this. So huge asset with EV chargers. But again, it doesn't have to be something where you have to wait around and you can't go drive out to where you needed to get to. It will not. It will take in all the information, all the different inputs, and make sure that you're still getting to live your life the way you want to.
Well, I want to thank you all. We've used our session. We're right on time. I'd really like to thank each of our guests. It was a great conversation. It's one that I really enjoyed because you're all such subject matter experts. You all have worked together as a team. And it really has been great to hear the examples and the details underneath here. So I also like to thank our sponsors, MIT Executive Forum, for this session. And I look forward to future conversations together. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you.